Our next porch story features Sarah Schmidt speaking about the bats on Whidbey Island. This was recorded July 17th, 2019.
Alrighty. Well, thank you for coming.
Thanks for doing it.
I'm sort of winging it. I do lots of bat talks, but generally I have a PowerPoint, and so I brought other props. But I will talk a little bit about bats and then very much welcome questions. So the reason I am here talking to you about bats is because when I was in the 1990s, I was living in Arizona and I was working for the Forest Service, and I was running a visitor center in southeastern Arizona. And my boss at the Forest Service knew I was interested in studying wildlife and going back to school in my 40s and doing graduate work. So he invited me to go to a workshop that was a 3-day workshop on endangered small mammals of that southeastern Arizona. And 2 out of 3 days were about bats. And I've always been a wildlife person. My mom loved wildlife. And I was trying to figure out why I didn't know more about bats. I thought there were like maybe a dozen kinds. You know, they're these little brown silhouettes at night. And I discovered there are so many different kinds of bats, and they're so interesting. So I ended up getting involved studying bats. I had an opportunity that summer to, where I was living in Portal, Arizona, this guy came along who was the most famous bat photographer, Marlin Tuttle, and he was taking photos for National Geographic. And so he ended up taking the photos for this article in the magazine. And so I got to totally fall in love with bats and ended up doing my master's research on bats in Arizona. And then I moved up here, and our bat, we don't have as many, but a lot of the same things apply. And one of the things that really got me into the bats was that I was there at this workshop, and they misnetted bats. Does everybody know what a misnet is? It's the way people, scientists, catch birds to study them, to band them, and things like that. It's a net. It kind of looks like an old lady's hair net. I think we'd all remember what that might look like. It's a very fine net with loose pockets in it, and when a flying thing hits it, like a bird or a bat, they get tangled. They quickly get tangled, and so then you untangle them, and that's how you catch them. And I handled about 3,000 bats during my years of research in Arizona. So anyway, we misnetted these bats, and I had this one in my hand, in my glove, and I was probably about this big. And I looked at this face, and I'm like, it looks like a puppy or a monkey. It doesn't look like a mouse. You know, everybody talks about flying rodents. Well, bats are not rodents at all. And so I just got really intrigued and began to learn about them. And I like to start off my talk by reading a poem. And this poem is from this book called The Bat Poet from 1964 by Randall Jarrell. A delightful book, children's book that's great for all ages, you know. So our bats in Washington are all insect eaters or invertebrate eaters. They might eat centipedes or scorpions or those are the main non-insects, but mostly insects. And I'm going to read a poem called The Bat that will tell you a lot about bats in the course of this poem. And then I will ask you questions at the end to see what you picked up. Or you may already know. But anyway, a bat is born naked and blind and pale. His mother makes a pocket of her tail and catches him. He clings to her long fur by his thumbs and toes and teeth. And then the mother dances through the night, doubling and looping, soaring, somersaulting. Her baby hangs on underneath. All night in happiness she hunts and flies. Her high, sharp cries, like shining needle points of sound, go out into the night, and echoing back tell her what they have touched. She hears how far it is, how big it is, which way it's going. She lives by hearing. The mother eats the moths and gnats she catches in full flight. In full flight, the mother drinks the water of the pond she skims across. Her baby hangs on tight. Her baby drinks the milk she makes him in moonlight or starlight in midair. Their single shadow, printed on the moon or fluttering across the stars, whirls on all night. At daybreak, the tired mother flaps home to her rafter. The others all are there. They hang themselves up by their toes. They wrap themselves in their brown wings. Bunched upside down, they sleep in air. Their sharp ears, their sharp teeth, their quick, sharp faces are dull and slow and mild. All the bright day as the mother sleeps, she folds her wings about her sleeping child. The Bat by Randall Jarrell. So, what do you know about what time of day a bat is active and is hunting? It tells you it's nighttime and that she eats insects. Did you pick up that when she catches insects that she catches in flight, she eats them as she's flying?
Yeah.
Now, there's some bigger bats that eat big things that will actually catch like a big beetle and go land somewhere to remove the wings and some of the exoskeleton to eat it. But the bats that we see around here, most of them are going to be eating on the wing. And if you have noticed, when you see a bat, we don't see them very much, do we? Because mostly it's dark. But there's that little time between daylight and nighttime when we can see them silhouetted against the sky. And you might have noticed that there'll be the swallows out catching flying insects. And then at some point the swallows vanish and the bats come out. And the bats, they fly weird. They lots of looping, and it talks about her looping and somersaulting. And if I had a video, I would show you pictures of them catching insects. They scoop up the insects in their wing membranes and their tail membrane, not in their mouths. And so it's like playing tennis or something. They're like scooping, and then they bring it up to their mouth, and they may do a somersault while they're eating. And so they're very, very acrobatic. Which brings me to one of my props that I put here. This is not the size of our bats. But it's a good...
Could be a fruit bat.
It's probably a fruit bat from the old world.
Wow.
But the basic structure is the same as our bats. And what it shows you, that bats are in the order of animals that's called Chiroptera. And that means hand wing. And if you look, and their wing structure, the way their wings are built is very different from birds. Bats basically, here's the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist, the thumb, and then finger, index finger, middle finger, fourth finger, pinky. So it's our bones. It's the same bones that we have in our arms and in our hands, but the fingers are hugely elongated. And then with our bats, I'll get a picture in a minute, but the wing membrane, then their skin that connects all of these and the ankle. And all bats are like that. Some of them also, many of them also have membrane between the feet and a tail. But that's the basic structure. And
the first and second digits are fused.
In most of them, they are. Yeah, in fact, sometimes you barely see any of that second digit. So that's kind of one finger because they're fused together. They have big scapula, very strong upper body because of flying, and then generally fairly weak. They don't need strength in their legs because they hang upside down. They don't walk. There's some bats that crawl on the ground. And another cool thing about bats, which this doesn't show, just trying to think if any of the pictures would show this. Well, this one shows it a little bit. So here's a long-eared myotis. This is one of our Whidbey bats. And I'll walk over there in a minute. So there's the wing and the fingers and the legs, and the knee is backwards. So our knee bends forwards like this. With a bat, the hip is rotated 180 degrees, so the knee actually bends up. Which means if they want to crawl, they don't have a knee in the way. You know, they crawl on four limbs, on their wrists and their little back feet, and so if they had the knee forwards, it would be in the way. And they also, when they land, they'll fly in and then they'll do a little flip and land with their feet upright.
Do their feet always go backwards like that?
Let me think about this. I hold these little things all the time. No. Let's see. His feet are towards his back.
Yeah, that's backwards.
Yeah.
I'll have to think about that.
Okay.
That's a great question, and I don't know.
Because if they
for
had
sure.
membrane between it, I could see where the feet would have to stay backwards because there's membrane. Although they could flip their membrane.
It's so funny. I hold them in my hand all the time. Well, this is a good opportunity to look at some real bats, and what I did in my glasses. But so these are, bats that died when they came into rehab and didn't make it, and then they were stuffed. So you can see these are 4 of our species. We have 9 species on Whidbey.
Wow.
These
You
are
can
the
see
ones.
their little feet are going out to the side there. So
Right. And I think their toes go towards their belly, not their back.
Okay.
I'm looking at,
Wow.
their toes are going towards their belly. So that's.
These guys are on our umbrellas on our deck.
Yes, actually, it's probably this one.
It's so tiny.
They're so similar, it's really hard to tell them apart.
They're just adorable.
Oh, wow.
They love patio umbrellas.
Oh
You
my
sent me a
gosh.
picture years ago. I use it in my slideshow from somebody, a friend of his in Squim, that had
Oh my gosh.
a bat in their patio umbrella.
Wow. Do
So-
they just hang in there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's nice and dark. It's a little cave.
Oh my
So,
god.
yeah, so where bats are, I talk about them going back to the barn in the case of the poem, but basically they want to go somewhere dark and safe and cozy. Our bats here would have naturally used giant old trees, so think we have, big old growth forest, a tree dies, gradually the bark starts to peel, it gets cracks, it's up high, it gets good sunshine. That's the sort of place that bats lived here. And so an umbrella is kind of like a little tree with crevices.
Yeah.
When it's
That's
folded, then you open it up, and I imagine they fall or fly. Many of our temperate bats, they will go into hibernation in the winter. Well, they also do sort of partial hibernation, often any chilly night. It's called torpor. They go into torpor, so they don't go into full. They don't lower their. It's lowering your heart rate, your body temperature, and your breathing rate. I mean, all of those. The whole metabolism just slows way down. So they can do that at night, and they often, it saves energy. They burn less fat, they burn less fuel, and so even just on a summer evening, a bat in an umbrella, a summer day, may well be in torpor, and so it will take them a little while to get their energy back. They can't just, they have to warm up. If they have lowered their metabolism, they have to warm up to be able to fly. So, I will pictures.
That's right.
Chili?
No, I just said it takes us a while to get going too.
That's right. So the 4 bats I showed you there, those are, one of them's actually there's a few different kinds there, but anyway, a lot of our bats are little brown things, and they're pretty hard to tell apart. In fact, the one you pointed at, the little brown bat, There's another one, that's the little brown myotis. There's another one called a Yuma myotis, and we like biologists, cannot tell them apart in the hand. They're so similar. Their measurements and stuff, they know each other apart, but it's hard for us. However, their echolocation calls are at different frequencies, and so the way scientists differentiate it, like who's at a roost, is by listening to their echolocation calls, which I'll talk about in a minute. So some of our other bats, let's see. Here, I've got some fun. Okay, so this I think is the little brown. Yep, that's the little brown myotis, and you can just look at it and pass it over, just to see pictures up close, and you can see that its feet definitely go. Okay, I got it. Its feet definitely go bellyward.
Okay.
Because it scoops food up like this.
Makes sense.
But the toes would kind of be upside down if you think about it. Instead of our toes go like that, their toes come.
Yeah.
Kind of like extra hands.
So
Yes.
the toes are upside down.
Yeah.
The feet are normal, but the toes are.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's because I think it's because they're the rotation at the hip. And then this is the long-eared myotis. I showed you that a minute ago, but it's got kind of longer ears. It's slightly bigger than the little brown. And I'm sorry, I'm excluding you, Rick. I didn't.
That's his dinner, I
I'll
guess.
have it on that.
That's his catch, right?
Sorry,
That's dinner.
Oh, okay. Because I was thinking, oh, he looks like a butterfly.
And then these pictures, probably all of the pictures that I have were taken by Merlin Tuttle, the guy that I said that I met that summer when I got interested in bats. He founded and for many years was the director of Bat Conservation International, and these are from their magazine. So another species that we have here that we very rarely see is the hoary bat. And that's very different from our little the little myotis bats and the big brown bat, the brown ones that we see. Those all roost in protected areas, and so it might be in a tree, although these days many of them are adapted to, because we've gotten rid of most of the natural habitat, they'll live in buildings, they'll live under little, shingles or eaves, or in bat houses if people put up bat houses. So they look for little crevicey places. The hoary bat is different. It's a tree bat, and it never goes into crevices. It lives its life in the foliage of trees, generally conifers. And you can see how furry it is. It's got really, and if you, I don't think that has an open wing, but it's got fur halfway up its wing and very furry. And they also, they are not known to hibernate. Instead, they migrate. And so the hoary bats that are here in the summer are going to go down to California, Mexico, and places where there are still bugs to eat in the winter. So the reason they have to either hibernate or migrate is because they don't have food in the winter. It's not because they mind the cold as much as what they eat. Absolutely is not active in the cold, and so there's nothing to eat. So they either have to sleep or move. And another bat we have on Whidbey, and I've got two pictures of this one. This is a really cool looking bat. So this is called the Townsend's big-eared bat. And you will see it's got huge ears. So pass those.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
And the Townsend's big-eared bat, I don't know of summer colonies on Whidbey. They tend to be the females will gather in colonies with other females when they have their babies. But what I do know is some of them hibernate on Whidbey in the old fortifications at Fort Casey and Fort Eby. For hibernation, what they're looking for is very stable, quite cool temperatures that don't shift a lot, so they can just lower their body, lower their metabolism, and then just sleep. They, in this part of the world where we are in Western Washington, our winters are temperate enough that many of them actually wake up now and then in the winter and go out and fly, and either to drink, they might need some water, or speaking of water, the picture of the bat drinking water, and that was mentioned also in the poem. They drink on the wing. They do not crawl up to water to drink. I don't know whether there are any exceptions anywhere in the world. I know our North American bats. All of our bats, if they need to drink, they fly and drink on the wing. So to have a home, a place to live, they need somewhere to be safe in the daytime. Great blue heron. They need food to eat, so they need good, source of insects, and they generally need water to drink, and so they need an open water source. Possibly as small as a bird bath, but ponds and places like that are really, so because they skim over, and they'll go down and they'll lap, and then they'll fly around and come down, and they do it repeatedly until they've had enough. I actually helped this picture get taken.
Oh, wow.
That was one of the things he was working on that summer. So he captured bats in mist nets. I'm kind of wandering all over the place.
That's
I hope
okay.
this is okay.
We're staying with it.
It's whatever. So, but it was fascinating to see, how do you get a picture like this?
Yeah.
So he would capture bats in mist nets, and bats are much more, they're not nearly as excitable as birds. If you catch a bat, they tend to relax pretty easily.
Wow.
Anyway, so he would catch them, put them in a tent in a barn that had, it was like a big mosquito, insect tent. So stapled to the floor so they couldn't get out, and it had net sides. And then he would, in some cases, I'm trying to think if I have, let me just see if I have. Well, this isn't exactly the same, but I also saw him doing some of these pictures with the pallid bat. This is a Eastern Washington bat. It's a desert species. And so what he would do is teach them to eat mealworms.
Wow.
And they very readily learn to eat and grab things, grab mealworms from your fingers or tweezers or whatever. So he would teach them to eat mealworms. Then he would teach them to come to a mealworm, to a sound at a certain location, so he could get all of his cameras focused on that location. And then he would replace the mealworm with a cold cricket or scorpion or whatever these pallid bats eat. Crazy big things. But you refrigerate it so they're not moving too fast. You put it down, and the bat comes in and grabs it. And then with this one, because he wanted a picture of them drinking, he built, and it doesn't show it in that one, but he would build, if you look afterwards at the National Geographic, you'll see some of the scenes. He would go and get rocks and plants and stuff from the environment and build a little fake environment, so it looks like it's outside. This looks like it's at a pond.
Yeah.
It's actually a tabletop, or sawhorses with plywood, and then rocks and sand and plastic to hold the water, and then building up the sort of rocks around it and stuff. And then he would cover the water when he didn't want them to drink, so they'd get a little thirsty. And then the volunteers, we would stand along either side, and he'd have the camera focused to, catch them right in the right direction, and we'd kind of wave our arms so that the bats wouldn't sneak out the sides, and he'd get his pictures.
That's cool.
Wow. Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really fun.
There goes the magic. Now we know. That's great.
And I've got pictures of a couple more here I wanted to show you, just to give you some,
What
in
about
these,
the illumination? Did he have a flash, or was it illuminated?
no, he had flash. he would use usually three flashes, as I recall. It
They were-
depended on the
That
picture.
were triggered by the bat's movement, arrival?
No,
or-
he did it.
Wow.
It was his timing. Yeah.
Wow.
Now this was in the 90s, so
Yeah,
this was film,
Yeah.
yeah.
which it wouldn't be anymore. But this is also a Washington bat, not a Whidbey bat, but it's another Eastern Washington bat called the spotted bat. And it is it's just a gorgeous animal, black and white with long ears and these long pink ears. It's the only one I've never seen of our Washington species. There are 14 species in the state, 9 on Whidbey. And anyway, the spotted bat lives in canyons, like high up in canyon walls and crevices. And they have those big ears, and it's the same with the Townsend's big-eared bat. When a bat has really big ears, well, our types of bats have really big ears like that, it generally means that they don't just use echolocation to catch their prey, but they actually use passive hearing. So they hear the moth wings vibrating when the moth is flying or warming up. And so, those big ears are just to pick up these really fine sounds. And just the last picture I grabbed here was of an Arizona bat. So this bat is a nectar-feeding bat. And there are just something like 3 species that come across the border from Mexico into southern Arizona and New Mexico and Texas that are not insect eaters. They are nectar feeders and fruit eaters. And so they can echolocate, but they don't use it much. They mostly use eyes and nose to find the flowers and the things. I mean, they'll use echolocation to navigate at night some, but not so much to find their food. Most bat pollinated, and they pollinate the cactus, and they also pollinate agaves. They're really important pollinators of agaves. Tequila.
That's what I was thinking,
Yeah.
especially tequila.
And they're perfectly designed with this, the shape of their nose to pollinate, to fit into theirs and get pollen all over their faces. And then he took this picture similarly, catch the bat, put it in a tent with some flowers, put a little sugar water down in the flower.
Wow.
It's really hard to, especially the sharp detail, because he had everything set up for, really good flash and everything. These days, I think there are photographers that do more really amazing photography in the wild, because our equipment is so much more sophisticated than it was back then.
Wow. That's amazing.
Let's see.
So there are bats, or do most bats live their life in one location, or do they migrate?
Great question. Most bats live their summer life in one location. They'll have an area that is their area. We don't know where most of our bats go in the winter, like locally. We know they generally don't. Generally, the places they choose to live in the summer don't have the right temperature and humidity and stuff in the winter, so they will choose somewhere else. So if they're in a bat house in the summer, they won't be there in the winter. It's liable to have irregular temperature and stuff like that. We assume that most of our little bats, like the big brown, the myotises, that they hibernate in this area somewhere. But like the little brown myotis, little brown bat, one of our most common bats, we have no idea where they are. People have never found them in the winter. There's some theories, and we're starting to get technology that is small enough so we've had radio telemetry on bats for a long time, where you can stick you glue it to the fur and it'll fall off in a few weeks, but you can put a something that will send out signals and you can track where they are. But we haven't had technology for bats, because bats are very small and light, smaller than almost all birds. So we haven't had things that we could put on them where they wear it all winter and tell us later, then you recapture them. So, but the one theory is that they hibernate in talus slopes up in the mountains.
Wow.
Anyway, that'd be fascinating.
Yeah.
You can look afterwards, but I've got some books here, and this is an excellent brochure that you can buy. I'll pass this around also, just so that you know. I bought it at one of the bird stores on the island, and it's all the bats of Western U.S. So if you're interested in having a resource at home about bats, there's that. And I also have. I'll wait till I stop talking, but I've got a little handout.
So they have field guides, Sarah.
Field guides to bats? You mean like the beginner's guide to bats? I mean, that's a field guide pretty much.
Yeah.
But it's really different because Gary and I are bird watchers. So, birds are so amazing because you can see them. You can see them almost anywhere in the world you go. You can see birds. And so you can sit there and look at their, and they tend to look different. Bats are, didn't want to forget that. Bats, on the other hand, are mostly invisible because they're active at night. We've got a lot more bats around us than we're aware of, but we can't see them because it's dark. So a field guide like this kind of tells you about the variety that's there. You are very unlikely to ever get to actually look at a bat and look at that and go, it's a... However, there are these cool things called bat detectors or ultrasonic detectors.
Oh, wow.
And this is mine. My husband and I met at a bat workshop in Arizona in 1993.
That's great.
So that was pretty fun. That was right after, like a year after I got really interested in the bats. And bat detectors have gotten smaller, and now you can get this thing that plugs into your iPhone or your iPad or your Android, whatever. It's called an Echometer Touch. And so I plug it into my phone, and turn up the volume. And if a bat flew, so I haven't mentioned, but I think probably you all know that bats echolocate, and it's up above our range of hearing. And so most of the time, they may be all around us, but we don't know they're there because we can't hear it. If you have one of these, and there's a bat echolocating, then, and I'm doing this because there is a lot of ultrasound when you do this with your fingers.
Oh, wow.
Here's another thing that has lots of ultrasound. But because there are no bats flying right now, what I'm going to go to is my recording mode. So these are recordings that I sort by time. Recordings that I made in, there we go. Like this is 2017. I'm just looking for one that's.
Oh, wow. Ah.
And so I couldn't hear anything, but this is picking up the bat calls as they're flying by. And it actually then, with algorithms and stuff, it looks at that information, the call, the frequency, the amplitude, the shape of the call, and it says most likely it's a silver-haired bat.
Oh, wow.
And so it actually,
Wow.
it gives you the top two possibilities.
Do we know how they produce the sound?
With their larynx, is that what we have?
Yeah.
Larynx? Yeah,
Oh, down there.
yeah,
Wow. That's something.
I think so.
Because they sound like clucks.
Well, actually they don't so much. They sound to us like clucks, but that's because this is only picking up
Yeah.
let me play one of these for you. Let's see.
Well, the natural frequency would be, we wouldn't be able to hear. So that has to be slowed down quite a bit.
That's more like what? That's the shape. It's slowed down and it's brought down to what we can hear, but most of the time their calls actually go over a range of frequencies. There's some constant frequency bats, but ours around here mostly do a range of frequencies. So,
Wow.
so what other questions do you have? Any other?
Do you have an office or you work through Audubon?
Oh, in the 90s, I went to University of Arizona and got my master's in wildlife science studying bats in the desert. When I moved up here, we moved here because my husband got a job at Oak Harbor High School teaching science. I'm retired, it's just kind of what I talk about for fun. The only sort of work that I do other than interpretation is I'm a sub-permittee for bat rehab. So if somebody finds a bat and that's injured or orphaned or whatever, I can go pick it up. I may be able to care for it myself, or else I take it to somebody with more experience. But it's just out of my home.
Okay.
I was wondering.
But I'm happy to give my email to anybody that if you want to be able to contact me with that question.
I was just wondering if what I was seeing at night at dusk were bats, but the way you described them
Yeah.
flying, now I know
You know
it's
for
bats.
sure.
Yeah, because up by the pine trees, I would see them.
Yes,
and
yes,
I couldn't
yep.
tell,
Yeah,
but
but
that's
it's
exactly what they're doing.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a really different.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the time they're just like flying around, but as soon as they're actually hunting,
Yeah,
it's all over.
exactly, and that's
What's
exactly what.
What's
I'm
really
saying.
fun is you can have a bat if you have a bat detector, you can like hear them and see them at the same time. And one of the things they do when they're hunting insects is when they pick up a prey item, they do what we call a feeding buzz. So let's say they're going, like that's the speed at which they're calling. As they get into prey, it goes faster.
Oh wow.
And that thing that sort of sounds zippery, that's the feeding buzz, and it means like that's what they do when they're really zeroing in. It's like putting on your binoculars. It's a way to get more information and finer information. And they can detect with that echolocation, that ultrasound, they detect things as fine as a human hair. So
Wow.
little tiny insects, and they not only know that there's an insect, they know how big it is, which way it's going,
So what do they
and how fast it's going.
Here, what do they typically eat?
Here,
Yeah.
well, all kinds of things, and I mean, everybody thinks of bats and mosquitoes, which is cool, and
Well, I think of bats and moths.
yes, they do eat mosquitoes, but they also eat.
Do they eat bees?
Thought not so much. Anyway, okay, flies, various kinds of gnats and midges,
Yeah.
caddisflies, and mosquitoes. They eat moths of all different moths. For many bats, moth is a big part of the diet. They eat beetles, and
So anything
Not
that's
so-
flying at night, an insect that flies
anything
at
that's
night.
flying at night. If you've ever, we don't have that many insects here compared to some parts of the country.
Yeah.
But if you think of what you see coming to lights at night, although not all insects are attracted to light, but those things. And of course, as is the case with anything in nature, the things that get eaten don't want to get eaten, and so there are, evolution.
Strategies.
There are these various
Defensive
strategies to try and avoid them. And in fact, there are a few moths that have developed ears in their sides.
wow.
It's a membrane that sort of has the function of an ear where they can pick up the sound of a bat echolocation. And when they sense a bat nearby, then they will like drop really fast.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's something, yeah.
So it's
Aren't there some that emit their own blocking frequencies?
yes, there are moths.
Yeah.
Yep, there's some moths
Yeah,
that
that's
that
Wow.
do something back to kind of it messes up the bats.
Wow.
And so we've got what 9 bats on Whidbey, 14 species in Washington, something like 48 or so in the United States. There are I'm forgetting 1,300 I think species of bats around the world.
Oh, really?
It's the second most diverse group of mammals after rodents,
Oh, wow.
as far as the number of species in the mammal group. And so there are bats that they're bats that build tents by modifying leaves. There are and there are bats that eat. There's bats that hunt other bats. There are bats that hunt birds. Not very many, but there's some.
Yeah.
And then the famous bats are the bats that lap blood, which are the 3 vampire species that are just in Central and South America.
What is the deal if you have a bat house? They don't use it. They use everything else.
Yes, that's often the
Just-
case. Well, they have very specific things that they're looking for as far as temperature and humidity and
Yeah.
and we can do our best to try and mimic it. And if you have a bat house, I'd be happy to talk to you about the bat house and see if there are things that could be done differently to make it possibly more appealing.
There you
But
go.
basically, they generally don't look for a new home unless they lose their old one. I could talk for 2 hours about bats. So, but male bats in our part of the world, the males are they mate with the females, and the rest of the time they're off on their own. So. In the summer, when you find one bat in your patio umbrella or things like that, those are probably males. Females get together in maternity colonies with most of our species, and they all give birth like simultaneously. They're able to synchronize their parturition, and that's so they can leave they may carry them when they're very young, but then they will leave the pups hang in the roost, where they can huddle together and keep warm, and moms will go out and hunt and then come back to nurse and go out and hunt and come back and nurse.
Wow.
Something else I forgot to point out that the information that's in the poem, if you think about it, is that she had 1 pup. She didn't have a litter. Most of our bats have just a single pup once a year. We have a few species that have twins, and there's like 3 species in North America that can have up to 4. But for most of our bats have 1 or at the most 2. So very different strategy than rodents. And they also are pretty long-lived. Our average bat probably lives 9 to 15 years, and they can live. There's Myota species now that have been recorded 42 years in the wild. And these are things this
Wow.
big. So people are pretty intrigued, like how does an animal that big live that long, and they wonder whether hibernation has anything to do with it. What?
Yeah, usually the smaller, the higher the metabolism, and the quicker you're
Worn out.
Exactly. But then, they spend, the ones that they have documented as being particularly long-lived are all temperate, hibernating types of bats.
So where do you find the most bats worldwide? Tropical rainforests?
Tropics, probably, warm places. Certainly, yeah, in terms of diversity. There are bats, I'm just looking, I don't have that
Really have huge
information with me,
numbers
but
of, you know,
there are bats that are, especially in the tropics around the world, there are bats that are really important as pollinators, as seed dispersers. So whether they eat, one big fruit or, I'm trying to think what it is, the piper fruit in Central America. It's like a long stalk of fruit with lots of little seeds. They eat and they fly, and because they're at flying at night where there are few predators, they'll fly right across open areas where a daytime fruit eater would be afraid of getting caught by a hawk. And so they are really important for revegetation, reforestation. You know, if there's been a blowdown or a clear cut or whatever, that's not here. Our bats here don't eat seeds, but in the tropics.
So what has happened now with the,
White nose syndrome?
yeah,
How did I know that's what you were about to ask? Yeah, here's, you can
sure.
keep these or not as you like, but
We can share.
Yeah.
We can
no,
share.
yeah.
That was quite a plague.
What's that?
Well, it was quite the threat,
It is quite the threat.
still there.
Oh, very much so.
And
So,
spreading?
white nose syndrome is a fungus that showed up in North America in 2006 in New York State, and I don't have a map with me, but if you look at, like, so they've mapped it each winter, each year, you know, where they find it, and it started in one cave and it spread to the Mississippi River, and then it showed up in Washington State.
Wow.
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 Boom, 3 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago now. What it does is it the fungus lives in the soil in humid, sort of cool, humid environment, which is exactly the caves that the bats hibernate in. And swaths of the eastern United States have lost huge portions of their bats. Little brown bat used to be like the most common bat, and now it's practically on the endangered species list in some states in the east. So this has been, you know, bat biologists, it's the biggest die-off of vertebrate die-off, I think, that, you know, within like the last few hundred years, at least in this part of the world. It's huge. They found a few bats with it in Washington, and if you go to Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and look at white nose syndrome, what they're trying to do is just monitor, try and figure out where it is in the state, how much it's being spread. Because our bats don't necessarily hibernate in as big concentrations as they do in the east, they may not be as at threat. We don't know for sure, but we do know that some have it and have died from it. And what it does, it deteriorates the skin, and it often initially shows up as like white mildew, almost white on the nose. That was the first thing people noticed. But what it'll do is it will wake the bats up from hibernation because their skin is itchy, and so they will starve to death. And so then they leave their hibernaculum in the winter because they're starving, and they die. So
And
it's a long.
they haven't found any cure for it, or the
No
reason?
cure. What's the most recent thing I read about it? There are different kinds of research. They're looking at. Some people are researching a vaccine. Others are researching antifungal things. But they live in these cave environments. I mean, that's where the fungus is, and there's lots of things that live in that environment. So you don't want to just fumigate the cave, because who knows what good. What other things you're fumigating. And they, I forgot to mention, it is thought that this fungus came over from Europe, probably on a caver's boots or something like that, because it has existed in Europe for who knows how long, maybe millennia, and the bats there have an immunity to it. So it's like the smallpox story here, with the native people, where you go to a new continent where people have not developed an immunity. Or we have all kinds of examples of, plants and things where things come from other parts of the world and they haven't evolved with them here.
Clarification, when you said it went from New York and spread to the Mississippi River region, and then you said it went to Washington.
We don't. Yeah, if you look. Yeah, if you look at the maps, it's like it starts off in New York, and then it was like a,
Expand.
I mean, what you'd expect, sort of like,
Yeah.
and up into Canada and down, and then it jumped, what, 1,200 miles, 1,500
Oregon,
miles.
California, none of the.
No, it's down into Texas now, but that's more of this kind of spread.
Wow.
It's possible, some people think a bat just flew a long way out of their normal range, which seems, they could have hitched a ride on a truck. I think that's the most likely for because they hang, they'll hide in all kinds of little places.
We have a lot of caves around here where splunkers explore.
No, not really. I know up in Chuckanut there used to be a cave. I'd heard, but I don't know. We have one cave in Deception Pass State Park that is gated now on Fidalgo
Oh,
Island,
wow. Oh, yeah.
where some of the
Yeah.
Townsend's big-eared bats hibernate. But
That was
we
a
keep a
mining
lot of it.
operation. Right?
Prison.
It was
Prison.
originally, it was a gravel, prisoners doing some sort of
Yeah.
quarry.
Mysterious.
Regarding that white nose syndrome, I just read a book about an archaeological expedition to Honduras, and what a lot of the archaeologists or people on that team came back with was a disease called leishmaniasis, Leishmaniasis, and it's transmitted through animals. Like here, it's been found even in Oklahoma of all places, and they traced it down to a rat and a bug biting a rat and then biting the person. But I wonder if the symptoms sound similar. It attacks mucous membranes.
There has no evidence that
What
this
you're
particular
describing
thing.
isn't a fungus, I don't think.
It's not a fungus, no, but I'm
No.
Right,
wondering
yeah.
because it's a bite from a,
So far, there's no evidence that this fungus affects anything but bats.
Okay.
It doesn't affect people at all.
When you
Yeah.
ask
And it only affects bats in hibernation. So if they make it through the winter, it'll sort of, in the summer when they're active and they're warm and stuff, it might still be in them, but it's not, you don't see it, it's not sort of active.
Wow.
But then when they go back into hibernation, it might burst out. They are finding some that seem to be surviving, just with the genetic diversity that you have in natural populations. There's some that seem to survive it, and so they're hoping that maybe some immunity will be passed. Sorry.
When you asked me that I pick it up with my hands, will we give them things with our hands?
No, it's the concern about rabies.
Oh, okay, so there's still that. Okay.
Bats are. Rabies. We're at very low risk for rabies, as long as we're smart. And the CDC says the absolute most important thing is to keep your pets vaccinated. Because if anything's going to come in contact with a sick bat, it'll probably be your cat or
What
your
if they
dog.
get autism?
Oh, don't be a troublemaker. But bats are the only. They're the only species in Washington State that are a reservoir for rabies.
Oh, wow.
So in other words, we don't. It's not.
Bats are
It's
the
not in our
only
skunks
species?
and.
Oh, really?
Yeah, or the only
So no
group
skunks
species.
or-
Not skunks and raccoons and foxes
No,
in
that
Washington.
one bat you showed us looks like a skunk.
With the black and white.
Yeah. So it's there are some bats found every year in Washington, that are tested and are found to have rabies. So it'll kill the bat, but it just does it slowly enough that the bat could bite something else before it dies. And so you just need to be smart and never handle them barehanded, unless you're me and you've had your shots.
So I have a question about when they fly down to get water,
Yes.
how do they take water? Do they use their tongue to dip, kind of like a cat? Or
It seems, as far as I can tell, it varies. Some of them use their tongue, and some of them I think maybe just sort of like open their chin,
it
dip their
just
chin.
seems, they're so light
Yeah.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you dip your jaw in the water while
Catch
you're
them
flying.
all.
full
That's why
speed.
they
You
want
think
calm water. They don't go into rivers
Yeah.
and
Turbulent.
turbulent
No.
water.
Yeah,
They need it
running
pretty
water.
calm.
Wow.
Now, some like fruit-eating bats may not need to drink water because they can get enough water from their food source. But
Interesting.
it's thought that insect-eating bats generally do need to have water.
Cool. Oh, one other question before
Yes.
you're done. Do bats have any natural predators other
Oh,
than
yeah.
other
Oh,
bats?
yeah.
Yes, and as far as I know, in this part of the world, in fact, pretty much in all of the United States, I don't think there are any bats that prey on other bats, unless, like the hoary bat is a big bat, and if you stuck it in a cage, and it's with a little tiny bat, it might kill it, but that's a very unnatural situation. Probably in our lives, cats are one of the biggest dangers.
Oh, wow.
Barn owls will eat some bats. When there are large roosts of bats, like down in Texas, there are caves with, 20 million bats. It's moms those are all bat moms that go and have their pups there. When they come out at night, it takes them hours to all leave the cave, and there will be red-tailed hawks and peregrine falcons and some things that and snakes that hang down from the cave entrance and grab them. I mean, I've seen video of it.
Wow.
So there are some. It is thought, and again, I don't know if it's different in other parts of the world, but it's generally thought that that's not a limiting factor on bats. There are few enough of the predators, the natural predators, that they'll take a few, but food and a place to live and water are more important than in terms of controlling where they are and stuff than predators. Yeah, owls. Somebody said they saw a bald eagle grab a bat one night here on the island somewhere.
Wow.
I could see that.
I mean, I suppose
That would be-
they could not possibly be fast, maneuverable enough to chase a
Yeah.
bat, but I suppose if
One flew into
one
its beak.
flew into its face and around.
Well, you think about the talons of a bald eagle and the size
Yeah.
of a bat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even holding on to it because of
But, yeah.
And not
Well,
much of a meal.
I was at Matt Clope's one day, and I had some young people from Oak Harbor, young adults, anyway, talk about how they hate bats because they were waiting for the bus stop one morning and a bat came and caught them on the,
Oh,
grabbed their
really?
head. And I'm like, you know what it was? It was an owl, if
Yeah.
anything, because we have owls here that do, and
Yes.
protecting, our barred owls will
Yeah.
sometimes hit somebody on the head, but they probably, it was kind of an early dark morning and they just felt so, and of course it's a bat. I mean,
Yeah.
all the movies tell you that, right?
That's right, yeah.
I was at
They're
a
always
park
getting
one
bigger.
time or a rest stop, and the kids were throwing shoes up, and the bats would dive on them. Why?
I've heard of people with fishing poles, trying to
Just to
catch
aggravate
bats.
them?
Oh, no.
I mean, there's.
Why are the kids doing it, or why are the bats
yeah.
doing it?
Yeah.
Well,
We know why the kids are doing it.
yeah, the kids are doing
Well,
it.
why would the bats
Right,
chase
yeah.
the shoes? They would come down.
There
Right
aren't too
after
many things.
wow.
They're probably not used to something up in the sky, so they're like, "What's
Curiosity.
that?"
They might be
Yeah.
curious, yeah.
And
Oh, look like a
It was
shoe.
kind of annoying, but.
Feel free to look at books or.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very
That was
much.
wonderful.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
Sarah. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
Very
great.
always.
Oh, I saw one other prop. I will just because it's sitting here and I can. The bat echolocation calls can be very, very loud, but we can't hear them. The big brown bat, the decibels of its call are the same decibels
Wow.
as this.
Oh,
But
my
it's at a
gosh.
very high frequency, and the
Yeah.
higher the frequency, the less far the call goes. And but they actually, some of our bats, including the big brown, shout when they're out.
Wow.
When they're echolocating,
Wow.
which I think is
Amazing.
really cool.
So do they emit any frequencies that we can hear? Clicks or?
Two
Yeah.
answers to that. One is I'll just mention that bats, in addition to their echolocation, they also have vocalizations with each other that just sound like chitter. I mean, it's within our range of hearing. It's like chittery, chattery
Oh,
stuff.
so we didn't even discuss that, how they communicate with each other.
Yeah, they don't echolocate to each other. They use audible.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I've got to think more about how they produce the echolocation. I think it is in their larynx, but they also, it'll go, like some bats, it comes out through their nose. Anyway, it's complicated. So I need to look that up. Other bats, there are a few bats that echolocate within, like quite low, and the spotted bat, that black and white, that beautiful black and white one, in Washington State, that's the primary one that we can hear. And Bill and I were camping in the Okanagan, and you know, we had the bat detector, so we were
Oh,
confirming that it really was a bat we were hearing, but we could hear these sounds
Oh,
as it
wow.
was
Very
flying.
cool.
Oh.
Wow.
yeah.
But for the most part, we
A lot going on in that little body.
And most
Yeah.
important, the most
Pretty
important
amazing.
question I have is, what do they taste like?
Ooh.
And which one is the best one to eat?
well, unfortunately, that's not that funny a question, because in
Oh,
places like the Philippines,
Yeah.
bats some are going, you know, are endangered
Eat the fruit
because
bats.
Wow.
yeah, the fruit
Really?
bat people eat them.
Yeah.
They're
Flying foxes.
delicacies. Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and they use mist nets to catch them to eat.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
And they don't worry about rabies.
No.
could you not get them- get it
Well,
that
you
way?
have. I don't even. You have to be bitten to get rabies.
Okay.
I mean, it's spread through bodily fluids. So
Yeah,
Wow.
saliva.
Saliva.
yes. So
I-
you know, killing one and eating it, if you cook it, probably wouldn't be a problem.
That's stupid.
What'd you see?
Oh, there's a couple of baby seals floating
Oh.
around here, really
They're
young
so
ones.
cute.
And I don't think that's it. But
But you've been seeing them out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
This was
wonderful.
great.
Thank you
Thanks.
very much.